got a residual. Okay. Take those out, huh?
Good evening. I'm Peter Jacob. I'm the Associate Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to the Smithsonian and to this evening's special event. The mission of the National Air and Space Museum is to commemorate, educate, and inspire. Among the accomplishments we commemorate and educate the public about, few are as inspiring as the exploits of the pioneers of human spaceflight. They possess all the skill and courage of previous pathfinders of flight, such as the Wright brothers, Charles Lindbergh, and many others exhibited in this museum. But the pathfinders of spaceflight represent something in addition. They left our precious Earth, making the first steps toward understanding our place in the universe in a powerfully personal way. They were the standard bearers of the human species, and as such, carried a little bit of each of us with them. When John Glenn and Scott Carpenter orbited the Earth, and a few short years later, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped upon the moon, we were united in the purest and most important way we can be. Not as peoples of differing cultures and political and religious views, separated by national boundaries, but as a single species that irrepressibly seeks to understand what's around the next corner or what's in the next galaxy. People that let us into space inspire us so because they help us reflect upon who we are and how much we can achieve. Of course, we stand in awe of their personal prowess and daring. After all, they really did fly into space. But they inspire us most because they carried vicariously all of us along with them on this grandest of adventures and enable us to know that our imagination is our only limit. The museum is all about realizing imagination. Every one of the objects displayed here represents a compelling human story of meeting challenges and accomplishing goals. Of each of the museums that you see around us, someone built it, tested it, flew it, sold it, built a business around it, or had some other personal interaction with it. It is this place where we tell the stories of pioneers who shared and we live on. We are so pleased to have the National Space Society with us this evening and chosen this place to represent Space Pioneer Award for Historic Space Achievement. Among these objects that are a testament to human accomplishment. We're delighted to have the Society and the honorees with us tonight. So let me once again extend a warm Smithsonian welcome to all of you. And now to begin this evening's program, let me introduce the Executive Director of the National Space Society, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Damphus. Colonel Damphus.
And thank you so much for hosting us tonight. We couldn't think of a better venue for doing this event. Wow, what a day we've been having for those who've been at the conference today. What an incredible confluence of events. For those who were not with us this morning, at about 09:55 this morning, as General Bolden was addressing us, his assistant popped up and whispered in his ear, "Grapple complete," as the SpaceX Dragon vehicle was grappled at the International Space Station, and the cheers went up, and it was really a fantastic event. We couldn't have planned it any better. But once again, we really have to send out our heartfelt congratulations to Elon and his team at SpaceX. So please help me do that. And that was just a great way to start the day. We had excellent talks throughout the morning, and we had an excellent talk at lunch with Eric Anderson, his first talk about planetary resources, his first talk at a conference, and we were very honored that he chose our conference to do that. So I'm just beside myself with excitement about this evening and about this entire conference. So. Let me do a few things first and foremost. I've got a script here, but I'm going to go off of it because I think, as I did this morning, the number one priority for me is to recognize the team that has put this together. And Deb Cohen, where are you? Where are you, Deb? I know you're there. She is. Everybody see Deb. We recognize Deb this morning and Angela. There's Angela over here on stage left or stage right, whichever. Again, absolutely phenomenal effort on their part to pull this together. And honestly, I'm seeing some of the stuff for the very first time, so I'm super, super excited about it. I'd like to also recognize some of our primary sponsors for the conference. I'd like to recognize Space Canada as being one of the primary sponsors for the gala. Is Mr. George Dietrich in the audience? George, are you here tonight? George is delayed. Okay. He's the president and CEO of Space Canada, and they made a very generous sponsorship for the gala tonight. I'd also like to recognize our keynote speaker, Mr. Mark Sirangelo, the chairman of Sierra Nevada Space Systems, for their very generous sponsorship as well. And of course, or Professor, I should say, Art Dula of the Heinlein Trust, who made a very, very generous sponsorship at the very last minute. And the thing you have to understand is these things count for us, because as a nonprofit, you can understand that they're very, very important to us. Thank you very much. You know, I started the job on the 1st of January, and today I had the opportunity to brief our Board of Governors for the first time. And if you've ever seen our website, we have a very, very distinguished set of governors from not only in the space community, but folks in the entertainment industry and all. And as you saw the Colbert piece this morning, he pulled out Tom Hanks and Newt Gingrich. But there's a whole host of very influential folks there. Our chairman is Mr. Hugh Downs. And I remember Hugh Downs. I mean, this has been really cool for me because I'm seeing a lot of my childhood heroes. But Hugh Downs has been associated with the NSS and our parent organizations for over 35 years now. He was the host of ABC's 2020, and I remember when that show came out. And I remember Hugh Downs, and it was just a great opportunity to meet him this morning. And he'll be our Master of Ceremonies tonight. So I know that we're on a very, very tight timeline. So I'd like to ask Hugh to come up, and please welcome him with your applause. Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome to all of you. This afternoon in a session with the Board of Governors, Paul Damphus proved once again that he is really encyclopedic on almost any subject. He is, and he's devoted to NSS. He is a powerhouse of thought, and I was re-impressed by that. Welcome to the ISDC 2012 Gala and Dinner. And the honor of hosting this event is a high point in my life, and in what I can honestly call a lifelong interest in space science, and in the notion that, and I believe this to be true, that humanity is a spacefaring species. And so those two things power my interests. And we're very honored this evening to have two Project Mercury astronauts, Senator John Glenn and Commander Scott Carpenter, here to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first orbital flights by the United States. They will each be receiving one of our Space Pioneer Awards. As our keynote speaker this evening, we have Mark Sirangelo, who's chairman of Sierra Nevada Corporation's Space Systems Board. That's a big mouthful, but that's what he is. Paul is going to be introducing him, and he has a lot to say about this really remarkable man. So when that time comes, Paul will be doing the introduction. First off, I'd like to introduce Art Dula, who is a trustee at the Heinlein Trust. That's awarded, you know, the Heinlein Trust awarded the first Heinlein Prize in the amount of $500,000 to Peter Diamandis in 2006. Dula is also a principal investor in Excalibur Almaz, which is trying to convert Russian space vehicles to commercial use. He's going to be presenting the video of our award ceremony to give to Dr. Stephen Hawking the 2012 Heinlein Award. And many of our NSS members voted for Dr. Hawking, last winter and during the previous vote in 2009 and 2010. And a thank you to all of you who voted for him so that we were able to recognize Dr. Hawking's unique contributions. The Heinlein Award, which is given out every 2 years, honors those individuals who have made significant lifetime contributions to the creation of a free spacefaring civilization. And sometimes these efforts involve personal, social, or financial risk. So Art, the podium is yours.
Today is a good day. And any day that 800 people gather together to become joyous and to make these joyful noises about getting into space and moving humanity forward is a good day. Back in 1865, there was a professor, I'm a professor of space law, but this was a professor of physics, Clerk Maxwell, and he worked on something that was useless. It was some knowledge about how the universe worked, electromagnetic fields. And by 1877, his work was published. Again, it was never thought to have any practical use at all. And by 1888, it had been determined there was actually a physical manifestation of this use, Heinrich Hertz, but no practical use. So there is a long lag time between useless knowledge and great use, because Marconi then took this in the 1910s and 20s and 30s, and we have radio and television. Now, the person that you're going to meet by video today who couldn't be with us is one of these people, like Einstein with the photoelectric effect and Niels Bohr with quantum physics, that makes everything possible that you have today. For example, your iPad requires quantum physics, requires electromagnetic signals. Hawking, through his lifetime, has developed theories of space and time, and we don't know where they'll lead, but we know that he's seeing the universe in a fundamentally different way, just like these other giants. Maybe, just maybe, someday we'll have a spacecraft that can couple directly into the fabric of space-time because of Professor Hawking. So I'll now turn it over to the video, and thank you very much.
So today, we are here to honor Professor Stephen Hawking. He is known around the world as a leader in the physics and cosmology communities and as an effective communicator of science to the public through the media, television, and his writings. Professor Hawking was the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge, the chair which was held by Isaac Newton in the year 1663. He is now Cambridge's Director of Research at the Institute of Theoretical Cosmology. Professor Hawking has over a dozen honorary degrees and was awarded the CBE in 1982. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society and a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Professor Hawking has worked on a wide variety of theoretical issues in physics and cosmology, such as creating the mathematical basis for understanding the physics and properties of a gravitational singularity, or better known as a black hole, and attempting to define the theoretical boundaries of the universe. In addition to his many technical publications, he has written a number of very popular books, such as A Brief History in Time, The Universe in a Nutshell, and his latest publication, The Grand Design. Professor Hawking's interest in human spaceflight was apparent after he floated freely during a zero-G flight in the United States in 2007. At the time, he said, quote, "First of all, I believe that life on Earth is at an ever-increasing risk of being wiped out by a disaster such as a sudden nuclear war, a genetically engineered virus, or other dangers. I think the human race has no future if it doesn't go into space. And I therefore want to encourage the public interest in space." Now, Professor Hawking has continued his efforts to promote human space settlement as a real goal. In a joint statement in March of 2011, Professor Hawking and Apollo astronaut Buzz Aldrin said that a collaboration between the two men, quote, "seeks to define and obtain a united space vision that will continue the expansion of human presence in space and ensure the perpetuation of the species. The definition and promulgation of such a vision will help humanity better manage its affairs on Earth, and it will help lay the foundation for the establishment of human colonies throughout the solar system. So it is for these reasons, and so many more, that we today recognize Professor Hawking's significant contributions to our common goals of creating a spacefaring civilization. So now we present one of the most prestigious awards bestowed by the National Space Society, the 14th Robert A. Heinlein Memorial Award. Now, awarded every 2 years, the Heinlein Award honors individuals who have made significant lifetime contributions to the creation of a free spacefaring civilization. The award is named in memory of author Robert A. Heinlein and his many contributions to the pro-space movement. Heinlein, who is recognized as the Dean of Science Fiction, was also a member of the Board of Directors of the L5 Society from 1976 to 1984. The award, as you see here, consists of a miniature brass naval signal cannon. It's an exact 1/3 scale replica of Heinlein's own cannon. It's mounted on a solid mahogany base with a brass plaque and an inlay of black granite. Now, upon close inspection, one will note that the barrel of the cannon has inscribed on it one of Heinlein's favorite acronyms, and that's TNSTAFL, which stands for "There Ain't No Such Thing as a Free Lunch." The award concept in canon came from one of Heinlein's classic writings, "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress," and represents defiance of conventional wisdom and outside-the-box thinking.
Robert Heinlein saw the future as a positive place. He wanted to give a positive vision of the future. And for 30 years, every 4th of July, he fired this cannon at his home to celebrate the independence of the United States. And when he wrote "A Moon is a Harsh Mistress," his title for the book was "The Brass Cannon," but his editor made him change it. And thinking outside the box, as Paul mentioned, is a thing that we must do to go into space. We can't think as we do here on Earth. And the people whose brains are taking us into space before our bodies can go there follow a long tradition of exploration where people imagined and theorized and thought about how the world was made and how the universe was put together. And then we followed it up by sending ships around the circular Earth into the solar system, and eventually, thanks to the work of the people here and our honoree, we will take those ships to the stars. It won't happen soon, but it will happen. It is inevitable. So I would like to thank you on behalf of the Heinlein Society, which has about 6,000 members, I think, and the National Space Society, which I recall that day because I was there when they formed the society. And this wonderful day when we honor a wonderful human being whose thoughts take us into space far further than we can go today. Thank you.
So the recipient of the Heinlein Award, it's actually determined by our members by a mail-in vote. It's a direct vote by the National Space Society members. So some of the past winners, they've all epitomized the Heinlein spirit. And some of them include Dr. Peter Diamandis, the founder of the X Prize Foundation, International Space University, the Singularity University; Burt Rutan, founder of Scaled Composites; General Chuck Yeager; Apollo 13 commander Jim Lovell, Mars Society founder Robert Zubrin, Neil Armstrong, Carl Sagan, Buzz Aldrin, Robert Goddard, Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, Wernher von Braun, Sir Arthur C. Clarke, and Gerard O'Neill. And now I'd like to read the citation for our 2012 award winner, Professor Stephen Hawking. This, the 14th Robert A. Heinlein Award, is presented in recognition of your outstanding and continuing public efforts in support of human space development and settlement. In the last decade, you have repeatedly and publicly made a very good case for the need to move part of humanity off the Earth to avoid the all of our eggs in one basket problem, a problem that's well known to all space supporters. The long-range thinking you have repeatedly expressed addresses a fundamental but often ignored issue, the long-term survival of the human race and of human civilization. Your public statements are very important because of the respect of your fellow scientists and many others have for you and for your work. Besides giving more credence to these issues among scientists, your support also gives critical credibility and respectability to these ideas among the media, politicians, and the public. And the award inscription on the award itself reads, "The Robert A. Heinlein Memorial Award, presented to Dr. Stephen W. Hawking by the chapters and members of the National Space Society at the 31st International Space Development Conference held at Washington, D.C., May 24th through 28th, 2012, for lifetime achievement in promoting the goal of a free spacefaring civilization." And now please join me on behalf of the members and supporters of the National Space Society in congratulating Professor Hawking as the 14th recipient of the Robert A. Heinlein Memorial Award.
My name is Christopher Pope. I'm the director of the Mitchell Institute at Texas A&M University and a former student of Stephen Hawking's. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce him on the occasion of his receiving this magnificent Robert A. Heinlein Award. As we all know, Stephen has been navigating the cosmos in his imagination for most of his life, mostly as a theorist, but he has also been closer to leaping into the boundlessness of space than most of us on that infamous NASA zero-gravity training flight, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. As all who know Stephen can attest, he has a powerful and commanding personality, and we all love him for it. He once, for example, ran his wheelchair over the feet of Prince Charles. I think when we heard here that he was to be presented today with a cannon, we all began to feel a certain degree of apprehension. I'm very pleased to invite Stephen to say a few words.
I am honored to receive this award from the National Space Society. The list of previous recipients is impressive. It includes Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. It also includes Wernher von Braun. One of his V-2 rockets landed near our house. I had been evacuated, but my father narrowly escaped being seriously injured by flying glass. This is a reminder of the fact that the impetus for rocket development has been mainly military, in line with the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD. And mad it was, the human race nearly faced extinction in the Cold War. Since the end of the Cold War, national governments have reduced spending on space. This is the main obstacle to settlements in space. We have had the technology since 1969, but lack the will. Yet settlements in space are vital to the long-term survival of the human race. Sooner or later, disaster is likely to strike the Earth, such as a nuclear war or a collision with an asteroid. We shouldn't have all our eggs in one basket or on one planet.
Thank you, Professor Hawking, for those wise words. And once again, let me reiterate how much of an honor it is personally for me and on behalf of the National Space Society and the space community as a whole.
Very good. The remarkable thing about Stephen Hawking, and I have to tell you one short story about him. Years ago, Bob Jastrow, a friend of mine, was in his home at a time Hawking was wheelchair bound, but he didn't have the computer voice because he still could talk. And he wheeled his way out of the room for a moment, and Jastrow noticed on the coffee table there was a manuscript that was of a script that was ready to go to a high physics journal. And Jastrow, who's a pretty good cosmologist and mathematician, started to read that and realized in a short time that he was in very deep water. And when Hawking came back, Jastrow said to him, picking it up, he said, "How many people in the world could understand this?" And Hawking thought a minute and said, 4. That illustrates the height of the stratospheric atmosphere of his excellence. It's not a surprise that many top physicists have considered Stephen Hawking the top physicist of all. The fact that he can also translate that into a rapport with us who don't understand that is truly remarkable. Well, we're ready now to present the first 2 Space Pioneer Awards of the 2012 convention. We're presenting the National Space Society's Pioneer Awards for 2012 in the Historic Space Achievement category to John Glenn and Scott Carpenter. The Space Pioneer Awards recognizes those individuals and teams whose accomplishments have helped to open the space frontier. The awards are for contributions in about 16 categories, such as media, business, legislator, scientist, engineer, and so forth. The intent is to recognize those who have made significant contributions in different fields to endeavor to, quote, develop a spacefaring civilization which will establish communities beyond Earth, close quote. The award itself warrants a word. It is a rendering of Luna, the moon, in pewter. It's created by the noted artist Don Davis and produced by the Baker Art Foundry in Placerville, California, with bases and supports by Mitchell Hall's Studio Foundry of Driftwood, Texas. Now, the moon may not seem at first to be an appropriate choice to represent the spirit of a space pioneer. However, the choice of the moon becomes clearer when you consider that in almost any scenario involving an expansion of humanity into space, development of the moon's resources is a requirement. The award is given to recognize the pioneering spirit of those who strive to make space a place where people have the opportunity to go and make a life for themselves. I'd like to ask our keynote speaker to come on stage at this point in order to act as presenter of these awards to these 2 distinguished awardees. And as I promised the audience earlier, Mark will be properly introduced for the keynote address after this part of the program, but Mark, we'd like you to be the presenter for now. Mark Sirangelo.
50 years ago, this was the perspective that we had of what the universe looked like and what we could see from space. It's a prop, but it's a very good likeness of what this is. And if you can imagine for a moment, we didn't have this, we didn't have the Smithsonian, we didn't have much of what was here. Basically, all we had was that little vehicle and these 2 gentlemen. I am really proud and pleased to be able to speak today and to give you a little background on both of these great gentlemen. John Glenn is a former Marine pilot and a U.S. Senator who was the first American to orbit Earth and the 3rd American in space. Glenn was a Marine Corps fighter pilot before joining the Mercury program as a member of NASA's original group, the Mercury 7. He orbited the Earth in capsule Friendship 7, here to my left, on February 20th, 1962. After retiring from NASA, he entered politics and represented the great state of Ohio in the United States Senate from 1974 to 1999. Glenn received the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1978. He was introduced and inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame in 1990. On October 29, 1998, he became the oldest person to fly in space when, at the age of 77, he flew on the Shuttle Discovery STS-95. This flight made him the only person to fly in both the Mercury and the Space Shuttle programs. Scott Carpenter was the second American in orbit and the fourth in space. His service as for Project Mercury astronaut with his flight Mercury Atlas 7 on May 24, 1962, in the Aurora 7 spacecraft proved that the United States could repeatedly launch personnel into Earth orbit and recover them safely. He was able to bring the mission back safely to Earth in spite of problems caused by a malfunctioning pitch sensor and by effectively conserving altitude and fuel and managing his whole control during his burn. A pretty amazing feat. He later served as the executive assistant to the director of the Manned Space Flight Center in Houston. In addition to his service with NASA, he served as a naval aviator and a test pilot. In 1965, he spent 28 days living underwater in Navy Sea Lab, and he also served as director of the Aquanaut operations of Sea Lab 3 and was involved in active duties during that program. The awards we have are in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Project Mercury flights in 1962 and for your long and dedicated service to the United States and its space program. I'd like to invite John Glenn to come up to the podium and accept his award.
Thank you very much. Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. It's a particular pleasure to be here this evening. It's always a pleasure to come over here. I don't know how many of you have been up to look at the Wright brothers' first airplane up there. But that and this hall here represent a number of firsts that are very important. And it's almost hard to believe how fast that things developed after the Wright brothers made their first flight. It was only about 12 years until planes were dogfighting in France, the Lafayette Escadrille and so on in France in World War I. It was only about 24 years till Lindbergh and this machine right up here above us flew across the Atlantic. Just 24 years from the Wright brothers. Think about the Wright brothers plane. If you look at it up there, I'm always amazed at the one that's up in the gallery. You can't see it from here, but I'm always amazed at how they controlled that first flight. You ever look, he had a yoke on his hips, went back and forth and went to a wire up and warped the trailing edge of the wing. Try that in a 747 coming in today. But we went ahead very, very rapidly, and it was only 66 years until Buzz here and Mike and Neil came back in this command module over here. Just 66 years from the Wright brothers' first flight. And so there's a lot of firsts represented here that I get a kick out of coming back here and seeing. Chuck Yeager's X-1, the first plane to exceed the speed of sound, is up here above us, right over my head up here, the orange one. So this is really a memorable hall. I, of course, have some very special feelings about this contraption right here on my left. And Scott does too. His was identical to that one also. But then we went on to back here in the Gemini, perfected some of our rendezvous techniques. And then this over here was the actual command module that they came back from the moon. And Buzz, have you met all these people here? Buzz, stand up, Buzz. You ought to give him recognition here. All this to me, though, the importance of what we're doing tonight here and what the NSS does, I think there's a different context I'd like to put in, a bigger context. And you go back to this country's forming days when there were only 2 or 3 million people along this eastern seaboard, and you think about how we advanced as a nation, are there a couple of fundamental things there that we should learn today if we're going to continue to be a leader in the world? And I think there are. I think, number one, the importance of the individual in this country was different than any place else, and that included education. And we wound up with the best educated citizenry that ever had been in the history of the world. And number two, and this fits very much in what we're talking about here, is basic research and exploration, whether exploration going out or mini exploration in our laboratories. And with those two fundamental things, education and research and innovation, we learned the new things first. With an educated citizenry, bang, we just created new businesses, industries, and went from a nothing nation at the time of the revolution to a world leader by 1900, just about 125 years later. And that's where this fits in and what the efforts of NAS fit into, it seems to me. You're interested in making sure that people are educated, we know, and that our leaders know what's going on, know your views on this thing, know the importance of what you think about it. At the same time, sponsoring research and inquiry into the unknown, which is the real heart of what NSS does. And so it fits in perfectly with where we are right now, I think. And I think the nation that leads in these areas of education and research 50 years from now will be the world's leader. And I want to see that be us. And thank you, NSS, for not only this award today here, which I treasure very, very much, but also continue your work in these areas that contribute so much to education and to continuing research in the space program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Before I bring Scott Carpenter up, I have a little story that I've heard, and I believe it's true. Scott is from Boulder, Colorado, which is where I'm from and where our company's headquartered. And as you heard a little bit earlier, he had some trouble on his landing and apparently missed the landing zone because of technical problems by a couple of hundred miles and wound up floating around in the ocean. And to give you a sense of the man's character and his ability and thoughtfulness, while he was waiting around there, waiting to be picked up, he had his survival gear out, and when the jumpers came down to get him, he offered them some water and food in case they were hungry. So I'd like to, if I can now, present the award to Scott Carpenter, the 50th anniversary of your Project Mercury, for your long and dedicated service to the United States and to the space program.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, it goes without saying that I am honored by your presence here and by this award. However, I feel this award is earned not for a flight, but for a participation with an American team called NASA in a heated competition with the Soviet Union for preeminence in space. We believed in those days, as did the Soviets, that preeminence in space was a condition of our freedom. That competition drove them to do better work. It drove us to be better and do better work. But the Soviets led by a great degree in those days. They did everything first, and they did everything better. But that competition wakened the sleeping giant, which was the United States. And I like to think that one of the most important reasons for the fact that we won or that the Soviets lost the space race is because men and women who grow up and live in a totalitarian country and regime can never compete successfully with men and women who are free in a free nation. I miss the national unity that that competition brought to this country. I hope we can revive that unity and suggest that we use that unity to drive us back to Mars. Thank you.
Well, now, I'm very happy to announce that it is time now to remind you of an earlier promise that I made to the audience that the keynote address will be given at this time, and I'd like to call Paul Damphus back to the microphone to introduce our keynote speaker. Paul.
I'll just make some very brief comments to put this into context for you. As we look back and we celebrate these American heroes, these Mercury astronauts, John Glenn and Scott Carpenter, as Senator Glenn has pointed out, if you look around these hallowed halls, it makes it very easy to make comments because there's so much history here. But if you look in your programs, we sort of wrestled with a theme for the night, and we came up with On the Shoulders of Giants, because that's what we're doing, is we're honoring these American heroes, but we're doing it with an eye towards the future. And we have symbols of that right here. We have Friendship 7, but yet above us, we have Spaceship 1, a fully commercial spacecraft. And I'll give you one little bit of trivia. We talked about it earlier today that Mark Sirangelo's company actually built the motor for this. But one thing you might not know is if you get down on the hangar deck at Scaled Composites, who actually built the vehicle, and you talk to the guys who built it, Matt Steinmans and his folks, they weren't so concerned about winning the $10 million prize. What they were really proud of is that they broke the record of that vehicle right there. They exceeded the altitude of the X-15 on the X Prize flights. So, on the shoulders of giants. That's really what we're here about tonight. And I am really, really excited, and I've been waiting for this talk that Mark is going to give us, because Mark really is and epitomizes our future in space as a future leader and visionary in space. We've gotten a few tidbits of it throughout the day, but I'm very, very proud to introduce my friend, and again, a fine gentleman, Mark Sirangelo.
Thank you. Going to space is going to be a lot easier than following these gentlemen on the stage tonight. As you can quite imagine, it is a humbling position to be in. A number of years ago, I keep an article that I read back and forth, and people oftentimes talk to me about how difficult the space industry is right now, and I speak to the headlines that I think we're all familiar with. Things are going bad. NASA has lost its way. We really don't have a space program. Many thousands of people are laid off. Where are we going to the future? How are we going to get there? And is America seeding the space world? And we think, is the world really upside down? Is it really where it is? The problem is that headline and those news lines came from the 1970s when the Apollo program ended. And we think of this and we realize that life is really not what we sometimes think it to be. And this very famous photograph pronounced that President Truman was no longer going to be president, a little bit premature by the Chicago newspaper. And I think it's certainly premature in my view to say that the American space program is dead and NASA is not going anywhere. I think that is about as wrong a statement as there can be. NASA and America's space program is strong. We're seeing it grow in many ways. We're about to land on Mars. We've got planetary missions going all the way out to Pluto. There's a strong feeling of direction, in my view, under Charlie Bolden's leadership and the team behind him. There's many great things going on in the industry right now. And you see those things not only in the activities going on. Sure, we're going through a transition right now, and it's a tough time. But you're seeing a change. You're seeing a change that existed in every one of the eras in this building. And that change is going to make us stronger, and that change is going to make us better. I get called an optimist a lot, and sometimes I get called naive, and I actually think that's a proud badge I'd like to wear, because in my view, I didn't come into this industry to be a pessimist. I came in to grow, and I came in to make this something different, something special with the team of people behind me. And I believe, and I've looked through a lot of history, that nothing optimistic, nothing positive has ever been done by a pessimist. And we're not going to do that anymore in our industry. I had the opportunity not too long ago to talk to some friends of mine. These are very special friends. And I thought a lot about tonight what I was going to speak about and how I was going to talk. And I decided that there's nothing that I could possibly say that hasn't been said about John Glenn and Scott Carpenter. Their history is well documented. There's a lot of things going on. So rather than talking about what they did, I'm going to speak for a few moments about what they mean and how we feel about their activities. And I put this picture up here because a number of months ago, I have some friends that I served with who are in a rehab hospital. And I went to visit them. And oftentimes when I go there, I feel like I'm trying to bring them some degree of fun and interest. And those of us who've been in the military know you talk about stories of all the things that you did wrong that you can't tell anybody. And you talk about them more and more. And I went up there recently, and there were about 40 or so of our wounded warriors, many of whom had lost their limbs and were learning to readjust to life. And I thought I was going in there to talk to them about anything. And they came up to me, and the first thing they asked me was, tell me about the space program. Tell me about what's going on. Tell me about what you're doing. Tell me about what's going on in the industry. And the group of them just stood around me, and they committed to me that I needed to come back and brief them about what was going on in space. And I thought about that, and I thought about these men and women. There were several women in the rehab center as well. And what they were doing with their lives were altered forever. And what they wanted to know was, what was space about? Where were we? And I don't think sometimes we realize, maybe this room does, but how powerful space can be and how powerful we can be in space. And I've been going back there now every few months, and I made an offhand comment one day to them, and I said, I think that you guys are working out harder and running faster and running stronger than I am. Maybe you should come with me. And they said, sure, we're going to do that. And I thought about that, and I've decided that one of the things that we can do to honor them and honor the program is that when my vehicle gets flying, we're going to offer a seat up to those wounded warriors. And we're going to allow them to have the same kind of goals, the same kind of dreams, the same kind of vision that I have. This is a very special week. There's a lot of firsts this week, and I'd like to maybe just point out one or two things about Scott Carpenter and John Glenn. But Scott is an amazing person in many ways. As I mentioned, he's from my hometown and my current hometown, Boulder, Colorado, and he and his wife have, I believe, 9 children and a number of great-grandchildren. And he's been committed not only to the space program, but many other things, including the Boy Scouts of America. And today is also another very special day. Today is National Children's Day in the United States, for those of you who don't know. And it's the day that we set aside to think about the children of our world and about our future and about what they mean. And as I look at this, I believe that what we're doing in the space program is a direct impact on their future and their lives, and that's why we think. But if you look in the face of the kids, if you look at the kids that come to this museum, I have a friend who took me to this museum and showed me there's a hall down here that's empty right now because it's meant for commercial space. and I'm pretty sure we're going to try to fill it up pretty quickly. But when you look around and you see all these things here, and my father flew some of these, and I've flown some of these planes, that's not what it's about. It's about the face of the children who come here. Just stop next time you come here and don't look at this. Look at their faces, and you realize why we do what we're doing in our world. And I know that Scott and his wife and their kids and their grandkids believe in that. And this is my collection of pictures that I think are pretty fun. But the one in the lower left, if you can see it, with the two little girls, that's Scott Carpenter Park in Boulder, Colorado. And it's a space park. And you go there, sometimes I walk by there and I see the kids doing what these kids are doing, pretending to be astronauts and pretending to go to space. And I can think of no better way than on National Children's Day to dedicate what we're doing to the future of our children and to the future of our country, because it's their eyes that are going to take the things that I'm doing and bring it to the next level. It's Friday night. We're here in Washington. We're all dressed up. I'm going to tell you a love story, if I can do that. Is that all right for a couple minutes? It's a really special love story. It's a love story about Alexander Graham Bell. Now, not many of you would think of Alexander Graham Bell as a sexy, lovey kind of guy, would you? I didn't either, but I spent a lot of time researching him, and I think he's one of the most fascinating people in our history. He came to the United States from England because his two brothers died of tuberculosis, and his family decided to bring him here to Canada first, and then they settled into Boston, Massachusetts. And he was getting known as a linguist. He was someone who was very interested in sounds and how people talk. And he wound up doing something very special, which was to start the first school for the deaf in the world. And he was part of the team that did that. And he was very fascinated with this idea. And as he was learning to do that, he met a woman by the name of Mabel. And he and Mabel had something going on. She hated him, he liked her. And they took a walk on the beach outside of Boston, Massachusetts. The interesting thing about this was Mabel was deaf. And she was from when she was 5 years old. And Alexander at that time was trying to communicate to them. And they had a little bit of communication problem going on sometimes. And whenever she got mad at him, she just turned away. And since she couldn't hear, there was nothing he could do about that. She was, however, an expert lip reader, and we could have used her a little bit earlier tonight. But she became a student of his, as did Helen Keller. And he became very interested in that. And the love story begins because he struggled to find a way to how to communicate with her. They could do all sorts of things, and they did. And they fell in love, and they got together. And he invented something to communicate with his future wife, and that was called the telephone. And he did that because he wanted to reach out to her in a way. And by doing vibrations and sounds, he was trying to reach out to Mabel. And that was a very special thing, and he didn't really quite know what he was doing. But that's just the beginning of the love story. It goes on a little bit further. She fell in love with him as well and became his muse. She was the person who stood behind him, pushed him, made him do crazy things that he didn't want to do. And he had this invention, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. So one day, Mabel, when they were engaged, they weren't married yet, she told him that they were going to go on a trip. She took him to the train station in Boston, and he didn't know where they were going. She had packed his bag, had packed all his stuff about this new invention called the telephone. And unbeknownst to him, she brought him to the train station, and she forced him to go down to Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the site of the World Scientific Fair. And he argued about it. He didn't want to go. And she just turned around, walked on the train. And since she couldn't hear him, all he could do was follow her. It's a true story. They wound up going down, and he got what he needed to invent the telephone, and went on to invent many other things, including the iron lung, x-rays, and a whole host of things. But probably most interesting for us is that a number of years later, after they were married, Mabel came to him and said, Alex, this thing about flying, it's going to become big someday. And he looked at her like she was crazy. But she said, no, I think this is really important. So she focused him in on it. And he called the Wright brothers up, and he started learning about flying and learning about what to do. And he used his brilliant mind to do this. And Mabel said, you have to do more than this. We have to make this special. And she forced him, in a way, to focus his attention in his later years on solving the problems of aviation. Well, one of the things that Mabel did was that she took her money, she had sold her family house, and it amounted to what was now about $800,000, and she created the first X Prize. She put her money aside and she said, I'm going to put this money aside and I'm going to try to bring as many people as I can around you, Alex, to make you smarter. We're going to go out and we're going to give an award to the first people who can figure out some of the major problems of aviation. Well, he went to the Wrights and they started talking about flying, and he wanted to use some of their patents about how to make an airplane turn, and they did something called wing morphing, which is basically what a bird did. And to make a long story short, they didn't like the fact that he wanted to use his patent. So he, instead of cooperation, they went a different way. And Alexander put his best minds in a team in a room together, and they created the first aviation association. That aviation association was formed with 7 people. And it is the forefather of every one of our associations and every one of the things that we're doing. And those 7 people numbered some of the smartest people in aviation, including Glenn Curtiss. And they solved, in many ways, the early problems of aviation by creating the idea of how do you hinge the wings of an airplane. And because they didn't get the use of the patent, they created their own. And it went on to be on every airplane that's known here. Well, Mabel didn't stop there because she said, this is really good, but you have to keep going. So they kept testing the airplane. And this woman, who is now in her 50s, decided that she wanted to fly one of these planes. And she did. And she piloted, and I believe she was the first woman pilot in history. She helped pilot it. And she did it because of the thrill, because of the adventure. Her husband, ever the practical person, decided that because she couldn't hear, she was really good at feeling vibration, and decided that she was going to be his instrument. So he got her to tell him all about the vibration of the airplane. And the two went on to live a very long life. He died. She died a year later, almost to the exact day, and they were buried together. And that is, I think, a powerful story of love, of respect, of realizing, overcoming differences. But we have our own here today. I'd like to some of you may have known the stories written by Nicholas Sparks and Danielle Steele, and I will tell you that this story would make both of those two people cry, in my view. John Glenn and his wife have had a long and wonderful life together, but it goes beyond most people's imagination. From what I understand of the story, they spent time as toddlers in a crib together, and they grew up together, and they spent virtually their entire life together. And next, as they grew up, they were married in the 1940s. And I just want to read a few quotes that I've heard and I know. John wrote in his autobiography, "She's part of my life from my very first memory. I don't remember the first time I told Annie I loved her or the first time she told me. It was just something that we both knew." John gave her engagement ring, $125 apparently engagement ring in 1942, and she still wears it and it's never been replaced. Next year they will be celebrating their 70th wedding anniversary together. If you go down the street, you'll see the Jefferson Memorial. Right over the bust of Jefferson is a little sign in the back that says, "What is past is prologue. What has happened will happen again." And in many ways, this is the anniversary of President Kennedy's speech also, the famous speech about going to the moon. But I often liked a different part of his speech. One of his inaugurals, he talked about that this is a time where we're passing the torch. We're passing the torch to a new generation. And the metaphor of the torch is not mistaken. It is a lit torch. It's one that carries forward the dreams and the hopes and the spirit of those behind. And like the Mercury astronauts, I think we have benefited from the past, and we continue to benefit from the past. I'm fortunate to lead a team that's building one of America's next space vehicles. But beyond that, there are two, what I think are personal fun things for me, and that is that we're riding an Atlas rocket to space. And John Glenn and Scott Carpenter wrote an atlas to space many, many years ago in the 1960s. We also are following the shoes of the space shuttle, and we feel that all the value of 135 flights and thousands of people who put this together are carried with us every time we make a step and every time we go forward. And within the next 2 weeks, we're going to start our formal flight test program with this vehicle. And the first flight that we're going to be taking is going to be symbolic out of our assembly facilities in Boulder, Colorado, and is going to fly over Scott Carpenter's home and Scott Carpenter Park, because in my view, the past is important and the past is the future. We don't live... I think this is my favorite picture that I take out of NASA, and I love this picture for many, many reasons, mostly because you can't tell anybody in it. You can't tell where they're from, you can't tell their race, their creed, their ethnicity. Are they from NASA? Are they a contractor? And it represents to me the circle that we live in, which is the space community. And it represents that people coming together under what we need to, under circumstances, can do amazing, amazing things. We see the spirit, and in my belief that spirit continues, and we need to continue to create this circle so that together with the heritage of the past, we can move on to the next things that we're going to be doing. Kennedy, in his inaugural, said something. He said, "Let every nation know, whether or not it wishes us will or ill, that we will pay any price, we will bear any burden, we will meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe in order to assure the survival and the success of liberty." When Senator Glenn and Scott Carpenter went to space, we were chasing the Russians, and they changed that around. They brought us back to where we need to be. And in my view, what we're trying to do right now in the space program led by NASA is the same thing. It's time for Americans to stand up and put Americans back on American spaceships and take Americans to space from this country. I carry an ad that when I visited Russia, and that ad is a help wanted ad that is asking to hire people in Russia because they believe they're going to be building more Soyuzes. And there's nothing wrong with our Russian partners and our Russian friends. They have been wonderful to us, and I think there's many things that we can learn from them. But in my view, I want to put them back in their secondary position, and I want to take those help wanted signs out of Russia and bring them back to America. I'm going to end my talk here with two quick stories. One is about President Roosevelt. Since we're in D.C., there's a lot of heritage here. And there are wonderful decisions that have been made by presidents, and then there are some that you have to wonder about. And the first one is my favorite amusing story. Theodore Roosevelt, who did many amazing things, wanted to change our national symbol. He thought that the eagle wasn't something that was proper for America. It wasn't really what we wanted it to have. So he made an effort to change the symbol to the grizzly bear, which is certainly a majestic animal. But could you imagine the call sign saying, "The grizzly bear has landed"? Doesn't work for me either. On a more serious note, one of my favorite stories is about President Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. And there's a story behind the story. And in the time where Gettysburg was, in many ways, allowed us to get here. That battle was the bloodiest battle that America's ever fought because Americans on both sides died. And they decided that it was so important that they wanted to create this national memorial so that the people who died and fought there could be remembered forever. And they made this decision in August of 1863. And they invited the most eminent speaker of the day, his name was Edward Everett, to be the keynote address for that speech in September. And the dedication was going to be in November. About 2 weeks before, somebody woke up and recognized they forgot to invite the President of the United States. So they sent them a quick note and they said, "Could you come up here and to say a couple of words to close out the event?" He did, and he got on a train not too far from here in Union Station, and it's hard to imagine right now, with 5 people, 1 bodyguard, and a couple of friends and a couple of cabinet members, and they took the train up to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and along the way, he started writing his words. He was not looking very good. He was pretty pale, and people asked him what was wrong, and he just said, "It's fine, this is important, I'm going to keep going." And he got up there, and what no one knew was that he actually had smallpox. And he had an early stage case of smallpox all during the trip up there, which was not very easy, and the speech that he made. So the next day, he's sweating profusely, he's on the stage, and it's not warm, it's in November. Edward gets up and he talks for 2 hours. And there was photography had come into being. There were a lot of cameras, a lot of people that were up there. And they took his picture, and they finally finished, and they turned to the president and said, "Mr. President, could you come up and say something?" And he stumbled up to the stage, and he started his address, which we now know as the Gettysburg Address. And it was 275 words. It took him about a minute and a half. And he went so fast that there were no pictures taken of that. The photo that you see here to the left is the only known picture of Lincoln at Gettysburg, and the little circle in the middle is him walking off the stage. He left the stage, and he turned to his secretary and said, "That was a really terrible speech, wasn't it?" No one applauded, no one said anything. They were all stunned because they expected him to talk for an hour. And he got up and said his words and left. The next day, the Chicago newspapers, the same ones who got Truman wrong, said this: "The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, dishwatery utterance of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States." You think our politics are tough now. Everett, who knew better, sent Lincoln a letter, and he said, and I quote, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." And I want to just end on that note. And what did he say that day? He said, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men who have struggled here have consecrated it, far above our power to add or detract. The world will little note or no longer remember what we say here, but they cannot forget what they did here. It's for us, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for those who fought and so nobly advanced the cause of our society. For those who have honored, we take increased devotion to that cause, for they gave their full last measure of devotion to making it a success. And we highly resolve that those men have not struggled in vain. And Senator Glenn and Commander Carpenter, I'd like to say on behalf of all of us, we cannot concentrate, we cannot do anything here tonight or anything here that can ever get to the place of thanking you so much. But what we can do and what we need to do is to take that torch and move it forward, because it's up to us to take the work that you have done and bring it forward to the next generation and bring the space industry forward to the place that we know that you want us to. So on behalf of all of us and a grateful nation, we'd like to thank you very much for what you've done.
Yeah, we have an announcement about how we will deploy from here to the dining area, and Paul will give you some instructions.
Leave the logistics to the Marine, right? If you all could just stay seated for a few moments while the official party departs, let's please give everyone one last round of applause. Thank you.